Sorry. I'm Mike Kobzik. I graduated from Bentley in 2015 or so. And before I begin my talk, I'm wondering, is anyone here, beyond what they're studying at Bentley, does anyone do any kind of writing? Does anyone do any kind of music sort of stuff? Does anyone do any sort of community acting sort of stuff? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, well, a lot of the crux of my talk, from freshmen to funny robots, is all about how I kind of balance my creative side with what I was doing at Bentley, and then how I continued that through line throughout my career, and how I tried to balance what I was doing in my IT career and how I went back into data analytics, and then how I also balanced that with my creative life and led it from just a passion that I was doing on my own to my own small business. And my character Tito along here will be the guide along the way. So I went to Bentley University from fall of 2011 to summer of 2015. I chose Bentley because A, my sister went there, class of 09, and B, I really got scholarships here and there, but ultimately I chose Bentley because A, my sister went there, class of 09, and B, I really got scholarships here and there, but ultimately I chose Bentley because A, my sister went there, class of 09, and B, I really got an urging from my parents that, I also looked at schools like Emerson, which is much more creatively focused, much more focused on like the humanities, but they were like, you really need to have some sort of solid business foundation so you can go and pursue your hobbies on the side and have more of something to fall back onto. So at first, at Bentley, I really struggled through those first 2 years. At least back then, there was a whole curriculum of you need to take all these finance and accounting courses, and then you need to go and pick your major and then continue on from there. But I really wasn't into a lot of the initial finance accounting courses, and I really struggled at first, but I kept through it. I was much more interested in doing a lot of the business stuff and learning how to run a business, because that was something I was kind of had an inkling of what I wanted to do. But at the same time, around high school, I was really getting into creative writing. I really, really enjoyed writing short stories and coming up with characters and doing sketches in my notebook and stuff. So in senior year, I decided this is what I want to do as my main hobby. I want to be a creative writer. I want to write short stories and novels and other stuff. And then when I was in the freshman year of college, it was like, why don't I try doing comic books? But the main issue is I just didn't know how to draw. But I tried in middle school, I tried in high school, but no matter what I did, I just couldn't really pick it up, and that really hurt me. But at the same time, I could still write a script, I could find an artist to work with, and then I can kind of go from there. So I went through my I chose computer information systems with a minor in English, and I went through the rest of my program. I had a tough time with a lot of the Java courses and stuff, and learning how to make my own Android apps toward the end of senior year. Eventually I graduated in 2015, but unfortunately I couldn't land a job out of school. I had a couple of internships here and there, and I really worked those career fairs hard, but at the same time, it just didn't work out. So I ended up, for about 5 months after graduation, I just still went ahead and kept looking for work. So eventually I did get my first job at EY, one of the big four. So I was working in the Central Business Services division in their IT division, and I was one of about 8 people or so that was working on like the 15th floor of the John Hancock building in Boston. And it was quite tough for me because I was living in southern New Hampshire. I had to go and commute from there to Boston on a daily basis, and I was doing it like an hour and a half one way. So I had to go and chug a coffee at 6 a.m., hopefully not fall asleep on the train, and then get there and do my job for 8 hours, then get home by like 6:37. It was pretty hellish. But at the same time, I really kept on pursuing my passion for writing. And I came up with a lot of different story ideas. I was writing a lot of short stories, and I was still cultivating that love of comics I had. I forgot to mention, back in university, I was also attending a lot of club events. I was doing the Bentley Literary Society. I was a secretary there, and I contributed to the Lit Mag. And I was also part of the Bentley GSA. And not only that, outside of school, I was part of the Boston Comics Roundtable, which is a group of cartoonists and writers and artists who are all working toward their own dream of making their own comics, whether as for a living or as their hobby as they pursue my career, as I was doing. So I had that foundation, I had the experience, I had done a couple of short comics with some friends across the world, especially in California, lots of artists there. But at EY, I just felt like I was finding a really hard time balancing what I was doing with my job. I was working really hard, and I didn't really have a lot of time to write. But somehow in my notebooks between doing IT tickets, I managed to go and put together a lot of different story ideas, including the main one, which is my main series I'll talk about in a minute. But a lot of the stress of the commute and also not really fitting in well with the team really got to me, and I was let go of my job after a year. I was fired from the team. It doesn't really feel good to get fired from your first job out of university, I'll tell you that. So I went back on the job hunt, and in the meantime, my main story that I ended up developing into like a main series, you'll see in the next slide, The Beckoning. So this is a cyberpunk story that I've been doing since about 2017, 2018, and where the funny robots and the funny robots title of the talk comes from. So I did a lot of stuff regarding the early parts of the story in high school, but I put the project on hold as I was doing a lot of the shorter comics to kind of build up my confidence. And essentially, I went ahead and did the first one-shot of this, essentially just kind of a self-contained story, through a comics collective called Premier Comics, which is an anthology of amateur comics, actually founded through the 4chan Comics and Cartoons board. There's a lot of fantastic artists and writers on there, actually. And I met my friend Jacob McManamy from Toronto, who's from Toronto, Canada, and we ended up doing a 9-page one-shot. And then a year after that, which is well after I was declared unemployed, we were like, we got to do a series. I really like working with you. Let's go do a series. So I ended up going ahead and scripting the first proper issue of the comic, and we went ahead from there. And we did one issue, and then we did another and another. And in the meantime, I actually, oh, by the way, this little caricature, these two were done by my friend David Davis in California. But Jacob, when he saw this, he's like, I got to do my own caricature. So this is the one Jacob did of himself. Very dramatic. So, what was my second job? Finally got a job, I think early 2017, 2018. I went from the large Big Four company EY down to the smaller life insurance company, otherwise known as Commonwealth Financial Group, which at the time was affiliated with the Mass Mutual Network. And so I worked IT support for them from 2018 to 2022 or so. And really, it wasn't necessarily anything that I had to do with my degree. It was still technology related, but I wasn't working with SQL. I wasn't working with any data visualization stuff, and that did eat at me over time. But I was able to go and get some money together, get some savings together, and I had to go through the whole temp to perm thing before I was permanently hired on there. And it was quite relaxed, and I got to know everyone at the company really well. With EY, there's thousands of people, so you barely get to know anyone besides your immediate circle. But at this company, you really got to know everyone. You got to know what their tech needs were, and you went ahead and you really connected with everyone, and you were able to go and service their needs. And I was able to go and get the money in order to go and pay for the pages of The Beckoning. We were able to do issue 2, issue 3, issue 4. And I was really happy being able to go to the city and go and fraternize and stuff in downtown Crossing Financial District while also going and pursuing my hobbies. And I was finally happy to a degree, but I even also got to go and meet Jacob in 2019 up in Toronto to go to the Toronto Comic Arts Festival. So I found that I was getting there with the balance of my work and my creative life, but at the same time, I was still only doing IT support. I wasn't really developing my professional career, any of my skills. I knew what I knew from Bentley. I knew what I knew from my computer information systems degree, but I wasn't really studying anything outside of that. I wasn't pursuing any certifications. I wasn't getting my CompTIA or anything. So I just felt like I was getting stagnant. So around 2018, 2019 or so, I started looking for a job again in hopes of maybe going back and trying to be a data analyst again. But unfortunately, the pandemic happened, which threw a whole wrench in things because I was very adamantly looking at all the CDC stuff, hoping that the thing wasn't going to spread, but it spread and it spread and it spread. And eventually I asked my boss, hey, can I just work out of the New Hampshire office for a little while this thing ramps up? He's like, sure. But then I kept seeing on the side, they were all following CNBC, cases everywhere, and they were all going to have to work from home. So great, what do I do? Well, in the life insurance industry, there's a lot of older employees there who they're used to going into the office and getting their coffee and meeting with clients all the time. But at the same time, they didn't know anything about remote work. So I had to go and coordinate with everyone, making sure nobody was panicking, making sure everyone had the equipment they needed in order to go do their job. And ultimately, I helped them transition to a new normal. Meanwhile, I loved working from home because I hated my commute going to Boston. Even when I was working over in Bedford, New Hampshire, I was only about half an hour or so. So it was a much shorter commute, but still the office life wasn't really for me. So let me just scroll through my notes a bit. During this time, I was still able to go and earn money and put it toward my hobbies. I was expanding into some new things. I was doing a podcast with one of my best friends about video games for about 2 years. And I was even expanding into scripted podcasts. I was doing a lot of audio drama stuff, fully scripted with voice actors and acting out a story. So I was trying out new creative stuff. And the beckoning was going really well, but again, I wasn't really training, I wasn't really studying, and at the same time though, I was kind of keep putting it off, and definitely the creative side went a little up, and the career stuff just kind of kept falling. So, meanwhile, we had enough of the beckoning that I was able to go and say, let's start printing this, and let's start making some money. So, here is where I'm transitioning from just doing this as a hobby and putting it on my website into actually making it into a small business. I opened up a business account as a sole proprietor. Then I started doing comic book shows. My very first sort of comic book show, so to speak, was a small convention called PortCon Maine. They had this kind of winter market thing around November, December for people to go and get holiday gifts. And I had really nothing. I had no signage. I just had a couple of stands of books you would get at Amazon. I was just putting them up on the stands and pitching my story to people and selling it to people for $5 a pop. But I made maybe $250 in like one day. And I'm like, I love pitching my story to people. I love doing this sort of thing. And it kind of built a lot of momentum and confidence for me to keep doing this. So I went ahead and did Retro World Expo, which is a retro game convention in Hartford, Connecticut. I did Kineticon, the same convention center, an anime convention. I did Granite State Comic Con in my home state of New Hampshire, over in Manchester, New Hampshire. I started doing Free Comic Book Day, which is the first Saturday in May every year. So there's a local comic store that I go to where I go and you go and pay $50 and you get to go and set up, and there's a small free Comic Con that people can go locally. And I also started doing Wicked Comic Con, which is the main competitor to Boston Fan Expo, previously known as Boston Comic Con. So I found through this whole experience, and by the way, Jacob was able to go and fly in and help me out at the table and go draw stuff for people, and I just had so much fun with it. I learned that I had good salesmanship skills, and I really was growing this business into something that could be sustainable to help fund more issues of the comic and be able to go and do more things. So at the same time though, I wasn't really still developing my career all that much. I was just doing what I could in order to go fund it, and I was pushing a lot of this stuff off to the side, but eventually I just had enough, and I really had to leave Commonwealth Financial Group and go actually try to become a data analyst. So I kept applying around. I found a small company in Manchester, New Hampshire, and through the help of some good references, I eventually went ahead and I got a job at the Mental Health Center of Greater Manchester, which is a small nonprofit that works with the mental health community of Manchester, New Hampshire. Think like homeless people, people of low income, people who are in challenging situations, or to help them get back on their feet and be contributing members of society. So there, I was working as a report writer. I was going and using my computer information systems degree finally in the professional world, even though it seemed like I never would. I would have been stuck in IT forever, but I just kept trying and eventually got this job. So I was primarily working with clinicians and working with the data team and seeing what the clinicians need in order to get like lists of patients that were in different programs, whether or not they were progressing through their program, whether or not they were in particular challenges, and really just trying to make sure everyone had the right data they needed at the right time. But at the same time, it wasn't necessarily a perfect job. You know, it was a much shorter commute. Actually, I got to work from home for the most part, so that was even better. But what really sucked about the job is that it wasn't necessarily always the best team dynamic. I was hired to replace somebody who was there working there as a temp throughout the years, and he had a lot of crystallized tribal knowledge that he only had in his head that he didn't write down anywhere. So whenever I needed to know something and it wasn't clearly written down, I needed to ask him, and he might take half the day to answer the email, or might even not even respond to my team's messages. So that was really challenging, and not everyone in the team sort of spoke the same language, so to speak, in terms of, I might say something in terms of SQL, and then the data team is like, I don't know what that means, go ask Sean. So it was quite challenging, and in the end, they decided to go and eliminate my position and go and give it to someone from the database vendor. So I'm like, okay, now I'm unemployed again. And at that point, I decided to go ahead and start actually studying on my own. I started studying big data stuff like Snowflake. I started studying Python again. I also started studying stuff like Tableau and Power BI, which is, a lot of these data visualization tools didn't exist at the time when I graduated from Bentley. Like Tableau, I think was maybe barely even a year old. It hadn't really evolved to a point where I could actually go and study it. So during my unemployment, I was just trying to keep my projects funded with the unemployment that I had and the savings that I had. And aside from like one temp job that I was working out of Waltham, well, technically I was working for a company called Nova Biomedical, which is a medical devices company, but I was working in the warehouse. And the temp agency claimed it was a database administrator job, but in reality, a lot of the database work was done by my manager, and I was walking around an incredibly hot warehouse in the middle of July when it was like 90 degrees every day, measuring and weighing everything in the warehouse. And this had the potential to be a 2 to 3 month job, so that would have been hell. But thankfully, because I was so efficient, I got it all done in 1 month. But they didn't have anything else for me to do, so that was it. But at the same time, I did get a really good opportunity to go and actually get some certifications to go and get back into the data analytics field and be more competitive. On LinkedIn, when I posted that I was available for a job, I ended up getting contacted by a career school called the Visible Edge Institute. Now, career schools kind of fall in the middle between a traditional private university, maybe a community college. They're meant for people who may not always, they might be in a situation where online learning works a lot better for them than going to a physical school, or they might be lower income, or like me, they might have been laid off. So this school primarily works with what's called the WIOA program, which is the Workforce Innovation and Accessibility Act. So once in your career, if you end up getting laid off, you may be eligible for this program. Both New Hampshire and Massachusetts and a lot of New England states are eligible for this. You get a couple grand, and you actually get to go and choose what you do with that particular voucher. You can go to a career school, you can go to SNU, you can go to whatever you want and use that money to go and get yourself trained again to be more current and get yourself back on the job market and be more competitive and give you an edge, hence visible edge, to go and get a better job. And I went through what's called the Data Analytics Technologies program. It served kind of like a half of a refresher course for a lot of what I was learning in CIS with the SQL stuff, but also I got to learn Tableau. I took a bunch of Power BI courses where I could go and refresh myself and get to know these tools that didn't exist when I graduated. I went and got Agile certified so I can go and potentially lead a software project. I'm Six Sigma certified for project management, so I can go and parlay this back into my comics and be able to go and manage the company that I was growing and all the artists and stuff that I was working with and all my collaborators. And ultimately, they were so impressed with what I was doing, and I was allegedly one of the better students they've ever had. I was hired to go and work on a project for them to go and manage all of their student data and keep track of all the student progress in a way that they didn't have to pour through hundreds of Excel files individually to give an update to the career centers, essentially to make sure everyone knows where a student is on their program, whether or not they're lagging, whether or not they're ahead of schedule, and whether or not they're even doing their work at all. So with my Power BI dashboard, I'm able to give these sorts of insights so they can go and make actionable decisions and keep the students who are actually engaging with the program in the program and making sure that once they're done, they can go and be in a better position to go out in the job market. So it took maybe 10 years, but I went ahead and I became a data analyst. It wasn't necessarily out of school. It wasn't the path that I thought that I would take when I was 23 and I graduated, but eventually I got there. And most importantly, I was able to go and pursue my dreams of doing comic books, and my series, The Beckoning, is now on its 8th issue. If you want to pour through any of these, you're welcome. And I was also able to go and launch a fantasy comic called Wonder Calmers that is actually a collaboration with a fellow Bentley alum of mine, David Doucette, class of 2014. So in conclusion, what I would say is, how do you balance your work life and your creative life, even if you're not necessarily like a creator, even if you're not a writer, even if you're not a musician, even if you don't act or anything? Everyone employs creativity in some manner of their life. Everyone has some way of expressing themselves or some sort of hobby they engage with. But ultimately, when you graduate eventually, don't let those sorts of, well, first off, when you're at Bentley, don't let these things go by the wayside. Don't let it wither away. That's still a core part of you. And even when you graduate, you just have to kind of keep that sort of spark inside of you lit, no matter what sort of career path you take. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, let me know. And that's been my talk. Also, if you want to go and follow the artist with these Tito illustrations here, that's my friend HP over here. And then the artist of The Beckoning is over here on Blue Sky. And if you scan this QR code, you can actually find my link tree to read all my webcomics, as well as listen to my scripted podcasts. I have a series based on The Beckoning, called The Beckoning Noisemaker. It's separate from the comic. It's kind of connected, but it's just kind of its own thing, so you can just listen to it without reading the comic. You can read The Beckoning online. All 8 issues are on there for free, and we're preparing a spin-off pretty soon that I'm working with another another Canadian artist called Born Slippy. You can also read my other webcomic, Thief Tender, on there, as well as some of the other smaller projects that I've done as well. So that's pretty much how I went from freshman to Funny Robots, and now I'm the proud owner as of November of 2024 of Funny Robot Comics LLC. So I hope you enjoyed my talk, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
How hard was it to reinvent yourself?
Sorry?
How hard was it to reinvent yourself?
Well, I reinvented myself in terms of just trying to survive, just trying to get through this IT job, just trying to persist. Well, I really realized that if I wanted these comics to really flourish, because I couldn't immediately jump out of school and do this as a full-time job necessarily, I really had to have some way of fueling that. So my earnings were really stagnating when I was just doing IT, and I just really felt like I needed to go back into this field that I was studying in order to go and really grow my earning potential in order so that could fuel my hobbies, essentially.
And were there any experiences in Bentley that really prepared you to work both as a data analyst, but also to help you get on your career and your LLC on board?
Well, it was a lot of just getting fired from 2 jobs. That's like 2 entirely different things. It's a tough job market out there, no matter what you say. But that was the sort of spur to say I really have to sort of stay competitive. But at the same time, when it comes to the comic stuff, it's a lot of kind of taking those small stepping stones, whether it's being featured in a couple of the anthologies, then regularly networking with people within the comics field, and then just sort of dipping my toe until I felt like I was more comfortable to kind of wade into the larger water and sort of steadily progressing until I felt confident enough to kind of sell myself on my own. There were many years where I was in BCR and I would always just have scripts, but I would barely have anything professionally printed or anything that people were selling at shows, and I felt very inadequate there. But it took until after college, where I had real adult money, in order to go and start printing this stuff and try to actually start marketing and selling it. And that's how I essentially just turned the hobby into an actual thing I could make money from. And that's the important crux.